Looking to provide your school or organization with high-quality audio products at affordable prices? Andreas Communications specializes in designing microphones, headsets, USB adapters, webcams, and more to ensure online reliable communication. Their EDU series of products are built to withstand the rigors of classroom usage. Andreas Communication partners with iTutor to provide an exclusive discount for Learning Can't Wait listeners of 40% off their noise-canceling headsets. Head to https://andreacommunications.com/iTutor/today to access this limited offer. IPEVO is making online learning simple for educators and students alike. Their affordable and lightweight document cameras let teachers simply plug and play to share anything: homework, live demos, PowerPoints, videos, and more from anywhere. Compatible with any device, teachers can make the most of their document cameras with creative filters, time lapses, stop motion, and more through IPEVO's free software visualizer. IPEVO and iTutor have partnered to provide a 20% discount to all Learning Can't Wait listeners. Visit ipevo.com/iTutor to upgrade your technology today.
Welcome to the Learning Can't Wait podcast, an iTutor production. At iTutor, our vision is to ensure every child has access to education, regardless of circumstance. Each episode, we will be joined by pathfinders within and around the education space who are bringing about transformational change on behalf of deserving students. I am your host, Hayley Spira-Bauer.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Learning Can't Wait podcast. Today's guest is Dr. Sheldon Eakins, the host of the Leading Equity podcast and the founder of Leading Equity Center, and the ands keep going, and the published author of Leading Equity. I am so excited to have you here. Welcome.
Thank you for having me, Hayley. This is going to be fun. I'm really looking forward to this. So thank you again.
It's always a little daunting to have podcast hosts on my podcast because you kind of get the cadence in a way that makes the conversation really quick, but I'm going to keep up today. I know I can do it.
Oh, no, you got this. I like being on the other side of the microphone. So this is just
you relax a little, your shoulders kind of.
Yeah. Like I don't have to take notes and like really hone in on certain things and think about what will my audience think? So like, I'm here. Like, yeah.
I'll do all the thinking today on that. I'll do that type of thinking today. So why don't you start us off and tell us, how did you become the personal and professional version of yourself?
Oh my gosh, that's great. So full disclaimer. So here, I'm a Black man living in Idaho. And so we'll start there. And just the idea of, when I was applying for jobs, looking for work, I put in an application for Idaho State University, not thinking anything of it. It was like one of another 100 or so apps that I was putting in. I was like, I'm not moving to Idaho because there's no Black people out here. And I just put it in just for kicks.
See what happens.
See what happens. And next thing I know, I'm here. And so 7 years later, I'm still here. And that's kind of what really got me going into the whole podcasting, entrepreneur, and all that. I fell into all of that stuff. It was just like I was just dealing with a lot of things when I first moved here, just stuff I had never seen, never experienced. And I didn't know how to necessarily navigate myself. And I got 2 kids. And like they're coming home telling me, Daddy, this is what happened. This is what my classmates said. And then in my professional position, as I was working for a program called Trio, so I would go to high schools and I would work with the kids there, and they would tell me stuff, and I just didn't know how to help anybody, except let alone myself. And so I just really just started podcasting, just, reaching out to people that I was reading articles on, that wrote the articles. And I just said, can we talk? Can I do an interview with you? And I wanted to be able to share that stuff out with everybody else. And fast forward, people started emailing me, asking me, hey, Sheldon, can you do a speech to my community? Can you talk to my teachers? Can you talk to my principals? Because I have this professional experience. Like I've been a teacher. I spent 7 years in a classroom as a history teacher. I spent 1 year as a second grade teacher, I can't do elementary. I know that is not for me.
It's
So
different. It's different.
Much respect for all my elementary folks. I can't do it. And then I spent time as a school principal and then even as a special education director. So I had all this experience and background, and it just really brought me to the place where I'm at these days. So I really enjoy what I do, and I really like meeting people. But the more and more that I've been visiting classrooms, sometimes I will say, man, I kind of miss the kids in that sense too. I kind of miss that classroom vibe as well.
I can empathize with that.
Yeah,
I totally can. It's what having kids thankfully allows me to get some of that like sparking curiosity and learning how to handle conflict that I loved about the classroom. But I absolutely empathize with that. So, it's really interesting because you and I talked a little bit about your book and your background before this podcast was being recorded. And one topic that I really honed in on from your book, and part of the ideas that you espouse in your speaking and your podcast is modeling vulnerability and humility. And you did it just now. You have well over a decade experience teaching and leading schools, and yet you still felt like you were not equipped enough with the information people needed that you created a podcast. Like that is the definition of humility, that someone who very well could have been considered an expert, sought so many other people in your podcast to help you learn and inform your audience about a variety of topics.
You know what's crazy is even with a PhD, I try to tell people, I'm like, look, I don't know everything. And there's just going to be a lot of things that I can never relate to. However, I can do my best to try to empathize. Even to this day, I've been podcasting for 4.5 years. I've been training for a very long time. I do diversity, equity, inclusion work. I do the stuff for a living. It's what I do. However, when people say, Sheldon, you're the expert and you're the diversity or you're the equity expert, I say no. I literally just try to stay at least a chapter ahead because there is just so much out there. I mean, terminology changes. One moment we're saying pronouns, next moment we're not saying pronouns. One moment we're dealing with this issue. I mean, we got all kind of stuff happening on a national, and like from our curriculum being, I don't know, assessed, to put it lightly, from school shootings to other challenges, the trans laws, and like all these different things that are taking place. And there's absolutely no way that I can know everything and just be able to speak to all of these things. That's why I really appreciate the opportunities that I get to, when I'm on the other side of the microphone, I get to meet great and like established folks that are doing this work. This is their focus, this is their research, this is their specialty. I get to ask those questions and I get to learn, because at the end of the day, all I can do is just try to stay a chapter ahead.
I love that. And I want to come back to this, specific focus you have around modeling vulnerability and humility, which you're doing so well right now. And I want to talk about your podcast for a minute, because when I am really struck with is not the volume, right? Like, yeah, you've done this 4.5 years. You have hundreds of episodes on your site, but I'm really struck with how diverse the topics are and how, like, I went to your website before I met you and I thought to myself, I could listen to 30 of these right now at a minimum and make myself better at my job today. That felt really like these are really bite-sized chunks of important topics. I really love the way you format. How do you pick what you focus on, or does the guest pick what you focus on in each episode? That is a great question, because if you had asked me that 2 years ago, I would have given you a different answer. Well, what would you have said then, and what would you say now? Okay, all right. So when I first started, I was like, I didn't have a show. I was like, I was trying to get off the ground. And so I went to a session 4.5 years ago at a national principals conference in Chicago. And I was just looking for different places to go to. And I was like, okay, where do I want to go? And I just saw something that said Podcasting 101. So I walked in that room, and I mean, there was 3 gentlemen. Danny Bauer was there. Will Parker was there, Jethro Jones. All of them have their own shows, and most of them are on, I think all 3 of them are on principal and leadership context. And so they literally broke it down. This is how you do a podcast. This is how it works. This is the equipment you need. And they interviewed someone right then, and then they posted and published. And I saw that. I said, you know what? This really isn't that hard to
do. I mean, it's work, but it's not crazy. It's not as bad as I thought it was. And as a avid listener at the time, I used to complain in my head. I was like, dude, all I hear is how to be a better teacher and how to be a better principal. And I definitely wasn't hearing any host of color, let alone a host or a lot of the guests I wasn't hearing of color. And I said, I can sit here and complain, or I can try to create my own show and put my own voice out there and try to represent as much as I can. And so when I first started, I would find an article or I'd just come across somebody's work and I reach out to them and say, hey, can you jump on my show? But at that time, I just wasn't really established. Again, just getting started. And so it was like whenever they were available, I was available. It could be a Saturday morning. It could be 10 a.m. It could be 10 at night. It could be 4 a.m. Didn't matter. I would just jump on, which it caused issues with my kids and like family stuff because I'm jumping on at any time. Fast forward 2 years now, like I'm ranked pretty high within the podcast rankings. So now, honestly, I don't really have to reach out to people as much. I get probably 2 or 3 pitches a week from some publicist, some media, somebody or somebody has a new book or somebody has a topic. So now I can actually vet various potential guests these days. And I set it up. I say, Mondays and Tuesdays from this time to this time, this is when I'm available. This is when I do my podcast interviews. So I'm in a different place than I was years ago. I'm just thankful that I kept up with it because I know a lot of people, they'll start a show and it kind of falls off or there's, they post whenever they post. My goal was always, I'm going to come out every Monday. And I've been trying to do that I've missed a couple, but for the most part, I come out every single Monday for the last 4.5 years.
And if you want to check out this podcast, which I highly recommend you do, you go to learningequitycenter.com/podcast and you can find we're up to 292.
292
episodes.
Yeah.
Very close to 300. But still, 292 is a very impressive. So let's talk about, again, I really am focused on this theme from your book on vulnerability and humility. Mm-hmm. Obviously a lot of your guests, when they come on your podcast and we're talking about school leadership here, there's a huge amount of vulnerability and humility required. How do you set yourself up to teach people how to be vulnerable and how to be humble? Like, how does that's like it seems personal. How do you get people to get to a place of comfort in leading that way?
Well, here's the thing. So like folks that listen to a show, like they just hear the 30, 45 minutes that was recorded. So for me, I'll talk to a guest, like, especially if it's my first time meeting them. And you could, again, from doing this, you can kind of tell someone's a little nervous. I might even ask, hey, how are you feeling? Are you a little nervous? Is this your first podcast? Those are the kind of questions I'll ask. And my goal, and I always say this to them, I say, look, my goal is I'm going to pitch you something and you're going to knock it out the park. And I said, look, I got you. You're going to shine. You're the star of the show. I'm just the voice that facilitates this, but you're going to be the star of the show. And once I start saying stuff like that, I've noticed that people's demeanor starts to change. You can see that level of comfort starts to come out. Because I've had folks that'll tell me, oh, I'm really nervous, right?
Sure.
Professors love to talk. I've learned that people love to talk about their research, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they can articulate, like they can type it up. But to try to explain it sometimes within a short period of time, sometimes can be difficult depending on the individual. So my job is, as a podcast host, is to bring that level of comfort because, you'll get some folks that will be very vulnerable to you and say, look, I'm really nervous. And I tell them, look, honestly, I don't have a lot of time to do a lot of edits. And so the 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 likes, all of that's going to stay in here.
It's part of it.
It's the organic feel, the vibe. Yeah. I don't give questions ahead of time. I used to do that early on. I used to send them questions, but I really wasn't listening to them for real. I was just waiting on them to finish talking. And then I would ask them the next question. But now I like the style that it is now is just more on the conversation. And I try to make it as organic as possible. Honestly, I've had some people on my show that I was nervous because maybe I looked up to them. I was like, man, I've always wanted to have this individual on my show. And now it's on me to podcast this, to do the interview. And there's like, I'm nervous and I'm trying not to fan out like all these different types of things. I got to try to play it cool. But yeah, just building up that rapport before you hit record, I think is very important if you really want to have a good interview.
I love that. And, I want to pivot a little bit and bring that topic of vulnerability and humility into school. So, we're talking about leadership, we're talking about teachers, but we're also talking about students here. So how do you view the idea of, or the importance of vulnerability? It's tough to say that one. Vulnerability and humility in schools. How do leaders who are effective model that for their staff? And how do teachers who are effective model that for their students?
I talk about in my book, while I was writing this book. So I was going through a divorce, and it wasn't like your typical, like, okay, we agree here and there. It was rough. Like, it was a lot, we got kids involved, and I'm in a community property state. So there's all these different variables that are there, yet I was still working at the school, and I still had to show up every single day and try to put a smile on my face, even though I had all these different challenges that I had. And one of the things I noticed is, like, my kids could tell, like, I don't have a really good poker face. Like, if I'm down, I'm down. Like, if I'm mad, I'm mad. If I'm happy, like, I'm very, like, I'm one of those kind of individuals. So, like, kids will come up to me and I ask, hey, Sheldon, are you good, man? Like, bro, you're hella quiet today. You're not your normal jokey person like this. I don't see you dancing. We're not doing our little daps or like a little inside jokes. None of that stuff's happening. Are you okay? Now, typically, I would say, and one of the things I have learned from working on a reservation on a cultural side of things, usually when I would ask someone on the reservation, I ask one of our indigenous community members, I say, hey, how are you doing? It's not your typical, oh, I'm good. You know how like like our culture, we would just say, oh yeah, I'm good. But in their culture is often, no, I'm actually feeling down, or this is, so I've kind of just started learning that and kind of took that on as well. So when I was there and kids would ask me, how am I? And I would say, listen, I got court today. That's why I'm dressed up in a suit. I know you're not used to seeing a brother in a suit like this, but today is that day that I got to go in there and I got to deal with some custody stuff, or I got to deal with this, or I got to deal with that. And they would, you want to talk about it? So at the same, and I would share, and I could share to a certain extent. I'm not going on my life struggles, blah, 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 but I'm at least opening up the door and saying, look, I am a human being. Sometimes as kids, we look up to those adults and we think they're, Superman or Superwoman, right? We think these kind of things. And then they start to learn. I know a lot of kids, little kids, will think teachers live at the school. Like, this is where they live. I was going
to say, I remember thinking that. She slept in the closet. There was a pillow. I saw the pillow.
They're always there.
Yes, of course.
So when we start as adults and when we start to share and open up and talk to our students, say, hey, listen, I'm dealing with pandemic stuff. I'm dealing with financial stuff. I'm dealing with this. I have mental health, whatever. They ask me, where were you at yesterday? You know what? I took a mental health day. I needed to, I was sick, or I wasn't really sick, but my kid was sick. Like, there's all these different things that we can share, because at the same time, like, I see so many teachers asking students to open up and write in your journal. Tell us about your deep, darkest fears and all these things that they're putting these journal prompts, but we're not doing these same things ourselves.
Sure.
So how can we ask? How can we ask them? Right. So I'm just one of those people. I've learned, again, I'm not perfect, but this is some things that I have learned within the last few years, just trying to stay a chapter ahead about the importance of just being okay with telling your students that you're not okay. We're human beings at the end of the day.
It's so powerful to hear, but one, the origin of how you started to open up more with your students, having worked in an Indigenous community, and you were seeing the effect of you being able to ask others and them candidly sharing how they felt. That's like such an authentic way to recognize a change you want in yourself. I also really appreciate you calling out how so many teachers expect so much of kids. And, I've been thinking a lot about high school. And I've been thinking about my experience, elementary and middle school, but I've been thinking a lot about high school, when you're really close to adulthood, your brain is really developed, but you still don't have the same privileges and allowances in society. So you're kind of in an in-between state. And I'm thinking about how modeling for children the realness of your own life allows them to understand the humanity before them and around them, making it so that they can navigate the spaces and places they're in. And it connects to me for a comment you made at the top of right before we put on the record button on this podcast about centering students.
Yeah.
So my question for you is, what impact have you seen this had as a teacher in the classroom? And now, as you do more work around schools and supporting leaders and teachers, how have you seen this particular mindset transform the ability to center students and really have them be their authentic selves in the classroom?
I think when it comes to doing equity work, I see, again, I work with a lot of teachers. I work with a lot of principals. I work with counselors. I work with adults, the staff at the school or at the district. And guess who's not in those workshops? Guess who's not in those equity audits? Guess who's not in those walkthroughs or like the kids? The kids
Right.
aren't there,
Yeah.
right? They're not in those
the end
spaces.
user, the ultimate stakeholder.
At the end of the day, I'm not saying this to blame or any of those that's not my approach. But one of the things that I have always said is just because I provide a professional development does not mean that a student's experience is going to change. Kids are smart enough to know, oh, there's no adults around. We're going to tease this child on the lunch at the lunchroom, in the hallways, in the playgrounds. Like, kids do these things. And when we try to create new policies, discipline, dress codes, even curriculum and instruction, hiring, you know how many times I've had conversations with principals and say, do you have students on your hiring panels? And they say no. Oh, that's a good idea.
That's a good idea. I was just gonna say, let me guess. They're like, that's a great idea.
I don't know why I didn't think about it, but I'm like, they're going to be in the classroom. I remember when I was a principal and I had potential candidates. Part of the interview process was to go to the classroom that, if we had a sub in there that was kind of holding place, or if we knew the teacher was going to move on or whatnot, I would take the candidates, or I would even try to schedule it during a recess time or during lunchtime and see how that potential candidate would interact with that group of kids, right? So I would have some candidates, they would walk up and they would just only talk to me. They might look, or I can see that they're observing, but they won't interact with the kids at all. And then I would have other folks that would actually maybe jump on the swings with the kids, or because, little kids especially, they'll see who's that Mr. Who is that with you?
Why are you here?
They'll run up to you. You got some really friendly folks that'll run up to you. And if I looked and I saw that the teachers weren't interacting with the kids at all, there was automatic red flag for me. Because I think it's so important. If we are talking about school and we're talking about who's the school for, because it's not for us, right? It's not for paychecks. It is to positively impact our kids. And if we don't have our kids involved in those committees, those spaces, they don't have a voice. There's no student leadership programs or committees or any of those type of things where students have an opportunity to share, and there's not a space where they can feel free and invited to speak to their teachers, administration, or whatever staff member it is. That's a problem. And that is the work that I have been really trying to focus on more.
I will name that they're also, to build that, you can't just invite children into these spaces and expect them to do it. You have to create psychological safety for them as well. And I think that what you're talking about is like, you do, I'd love for you to expand a little bit upon the process you go through, your equity audit and all of that. I appreciate the naming of how do people interact with kids? How do they treat kids? You can't just have a principal say like, oh, suddenly we're going to ask kids to share openly. Like, as you've named previously, we expect a lot of children and we need to create the community and the environment that allows them to do that comfortably. So can you talk us through, for those that are unfamiliar with your process, what the equity audit is and how it's received? Like, these bring up a lot of feelings for people. Like, equity audits, I imagine, would bring up a lot of feelings for people.
Here's the thing, So when, let's say, a principal or district folks reach out to me and say, hey, listen, we recognize, or we've had a student created an Instagram page, our school challenges, and it's out there, like social media is popping and we're under fire or whatever, right? So folks will reach out to me sometimes at the, like, when it's too late, almost like
the 11th hour,
reactionary type of, but hey, listen, at least the work is going to happen, at least the work is getting done. And so but then you'll have a lot of teachers, or you'll have staff members that will say, not our school. That's not the experience. No, that's stuff you see on the news stations. That's not here. Those are in those big cities, not in our rural town, right? No, all our kids we're predominantly white. So we don't have any issues, like as if
nothing arises. Right, exactly. Because we don't talk about it. It's not occurring. It's not a thought in anybody's brain.
And our few black kids, they're good. There's no race. There's none of these things. So I say, all right, well, let's just find out if that is the case, because that's our interpretation. Is how we view the world, and is how, again, it's just because someone doesn't come up to you and say, hey, I'm having this issue, I'm having this challenge, doesn't mean it's not happening, right? There's a lot of factors there. You may not have a welcoming environment in which kids feel comfortable. I know so many times kids will walk around their school and their name is Johnny, and everybody's been calling him Richard. And we're like, wait, why didn't you tell us that your name was actually Richard? And we blame the kids. Like, it's your fault that you never told us, right? So I say, if we're going to do an audit, and it's 7 sections. It starts with your mission, vision, beliefs. There's leadership in that section, or in those sections. There's discipline, there's communication, there's feedback, there's professional development. So it's built on 7 different pillars, if you will. And I say, I want kids involved in this equity audit, because your experience might be different than what they're experiencing, and they're living this experience. People always talk about the real world, and I say the real world is their classroom. This is what they're dealing with right now. This is their real world. Now, often our kids have 2 worlds. They got the world at home, and then they got your world, the world at school, because they don't always get the opportunities to be themselves in both spaces. So let's involve our students in this equity audit. If you can get some parents, I'm even happier. But minimum, get your students involved. Select a few leaders. Don't get your, most popular folks. Get some folks that you can have some diversity and representation when it comes to students, but we don't want to we don't want to tokenize. All right. But this is very important. And then we go through the audit. It's usually, it takes time. Like, it might take a couple of days to go through it. It may take a few hours. I often ask, can I do some walkthroughs? Can I look through your classroom and observe and take some notes and provide some feedback? And so then after we go through the audit, then I put a report together, and then we start looking at, okay, what are some things that we could do tomorrow? Maybe it's just some tweaks on our website. Maybe it's just making sure, we got ChatGPT right now, which is really great for translation, because people tell, we got 20 different languages represented in our school.
Translates all of them. Yeah.
ChatGPT, pop that in, put that.
Right.
Rewrite this in Mandarin, rewrite this, so we have those opportunities available now, but those are simple tweaks that we can start doing tomorrow. Okay, well, now let's look at some other challenges here. What are some things that are going to take a little bit longer? Maybe it takes a year, maybe it takes 6 months. And then what are some things in our 3 to 5 year plan? What are some things that we can really focus on that's not going to happen overnight, not going to happen within a year, but we are focused on working towards this goal? That's what I love to start with, because people will tell me we don't have an issue, or we don't know what issues we have. And I say, let's find those things out.
I'm thinking of some really high profile, not done by you that I know of, some equity audits in some private schools in New York City over the past couple of years that made headlines a few times over. And the pervasive dialogue was, we don't have an issue. Like, our diversity is very high. Our numbers are so great. And it's like, well, actually, it's more than just in New York City. It's more than just diversity, right? Like, it's more than just what type of representation from different cultural, ethnic, racial groups that you have in your building. How are you handling? How are you communicating? How are you, all the things. I wish every school could have an equity audit and implementation. Yeah. How many schools have you worked with so far?
Oh, several. And not even just schools. Sometimes I work with districts I've even worked with nonprofits as well. I was just with the Juvenile Justice Department out in Oregon, one of the counties out there. So I haven't worked in the for-profit area yet, which I'm open to that, but mainly schools, higher ed. I've done some colleges as well. So it's just really just depends. But again, I think that's where you really need to start, because again, how do you know where you're going to go if you don't have a map? So that's just my take.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm processing a little bit about the unique way you approach it. It would probably be very different for schools versus K-12 versus.
Yeah, it's not the same. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and my background is all K-12. So I'm looking at this through the lens of K-12, and I'm actually imagining, Sheldon, how it would look had you come to some of the places I worked, as I'm sure the folks listening in are doing also. How well would we have done in certain aspects? And that's part of it, is getting people to think and realize where am I doing well and right by all my students and community members, and where am I not, and what do I need to fix? But
some folks get afraid. They're fearful. They don't want to know what the results are. Right. Wait, I'm
going to call out that a lot of folks, especially white folks, don't always recognize their privilege, and they don't recognize where they are in their own development journey. I remember one of the most important formative trainings I had in my own experience of DEI work in schools was around the idea that there is no arrival. Everybody is continuing to work on this. And that sort of unlocked, I think for me, it was really early in my journey, I will be candid. It unlocked for me the fear that I had to arrive at the final line and know it arrived at this idea that I will continually be learning for the rest of my life.
So I'm not a big fan of certification programs because of that. I know certain schools or institutions will have, equity and justice certification program. And I don't think that I don't think I have arrived. That's what I'm saying. I'm on a journey. We're all on a journey. Right. People have asked me, hey, can you give us a certification program? And I was like, I don't do certification programs. I don't do checklists, because I don't believe we're not baking a cake. I can get the ingredients to make a cake. I know, do this, preheat your oven, get your mixer bowl, do this, boom, voila, you got a cake. I don't believe that applies in these type of situations. It's a continuum, it's a journey. So I've never really been a fan of certification programs. No disrespect to any folks that do have those.
We're not denigrating anybody or anything here, but that's
just how I feel.
I really resonate. That resonates with me. It really does. And it also is a call to action for me. When I heard that the first time, I was like, oh, shoot, there's no stopping. That's great. I am a lifelong learner. It's one of the reasons I love teaching, because I believe that you can always be learning something new. But it really felt like a call to action. The work is ongoing and continuous forever. But I think that a lot of people are scared. I think especially with white fragility, a lot of folks are not really willing to do the introspection they need to do. And the study, it can be daunting, but imagine how much more daunting it is for the marginalized student or teacher in your community who is being mistreated, either knowingly or unknowingly. So not really a great excuse.
Well, a lot of folks are afraid of a black man with an afro coming to talk to them and call them out. They feel like because sometimes diversity, equity, inclusion training gets a bad rep because, people leave. And again, the whole people want to pass laws and stuff because, you made us feel bad or that, we hate America or America's this and that. I mean, these things happen. That's just not the type of training that I give. My training is to be very thought-provoking, because you have a lot of people who have lived a life in which these conversations never came up. They never really had to pay attention to them. It's not something they can personally identify with. And so my goal is to present some facts, to present some stories that will really make you think, I didn't recognize that could happen, but it makes a lot of sense. What can I do? What are some things that I've been doing that I can change? And again, it's not blaming anybody, but it's just more of, thought-provoking, eye-opening, didn't know that. Okay, now I'm on board. I want to know where I can do, it's not too late, those kind of things. But sometimes people get fearful. And like you said, that fragility pops out. And honestly, there's a lot of folks that rather listen to someone that looks like them before they listen to somebody that looks like me.
I'm letting that sit there for a minute.
Let it sit there for a second.
Yeah. I mean, yes. Yeah. I mean, it takes a lot of vulnerability to just get in the space where, bringing it back to like our original topic here, it takes a lot of vulnerability to get in the space where you're willing to examine your weaknesses and examine where you've gone wrong and admit your mistakes. But it is not really, I mean,
you gotta be open-minded. You gotta be open to it. Some folks come in already, diversity training,
what's that?
mandatory, I don't want to be here. Right. And so some people come in with that mindset. And one of the things I have had to accept at the end of the day as a trainer, if I'm only with you for an hour, 90 minutes, half day, whatever it is, whatever I'm working with you for, me personally, I have to be okay that there's going to be some folks that no matter what I say, no matter what I do, they are not going to be on board. I used to come into training thinking, I'm going to change everybody's life. And I realized over time, it's like, you know what? I mean, you can give them stats, you can give them this, you can give them that. You can even have stuff written by their cousin, and they just won't change. Like they just automatically come in with that closed mindset. And my goal here is just like, so I try to give the whole, listen, I really want y'all to open your mind. It's a brave space, but there's going to be a few. It may not be a lot, but there might be a handful of folks that it don't matter what you say. Doesn't matter what you say. My
hope would be that, first of all, in naming that, it again goes back to that concept of humility, which again, there's a theme here that I really didn't do on purpose because we didn't go over questions in advance. To your point, I used to do a lot of questions in advance, don't do anymore. Maybe the optimist in me wants to say that they weren't transformed or changed in the time that you spent with them, but hopefully that was the start of a conversation that led to deeper introspection, and maybe the community changing around them, right, would be enough to also facilitate a person's development. Because I was just talking to someone about implementation science. I recorded an episode on implementation science and the research to practice gap. And that's essentially what you're naming. You're essentially naming, we know what's good for people, especially people from historically oppressed and marginalized communities. And yet people are not necessarily willing to adopt that. But there are factors which can move the needle for someone who is really stick in the mud about change. And perhaps the community around them changing would be one of them. So the optimist in me wants to believe that even if you didn't walk away from those sessions with the change, that the community was able to sway them with your impact. And I'm optimistic as well, probably to a fault. I do believe in multiple touches. So I believe that sometimes, the principal might be giving a speech on the same topic, and they bring me in, I do the speech on the same topic, and they still, and then their cousin or the colleague or their best friend, or they see something on the news. I got a lot of friends that publicly put on Facebook posts, I used to think that before George Floyd happened, that, if y'all just complied or if you just didn't do but now my mind has changed. So sometimes it takes an act of tragedy or violence or whatever it is to bring some more awareness. And then those multiple touches or just having those conversations more and more times, sometimes that's what it takes. So, again, I try to be optimistic with it as well. Yeah. So I'm really sad to be wrapping up the time that we have on the podcast together, but it's been such a joy hearing you share your expertise and your wisdom on a couple topics while we've been together. The last question I always ask my guests is what advice you would give a teacher starting out their career. And I'd love to hear what you would share with someone newly in the field right now. Well, I'm going to start with, if you're just getting started and you're really interested, I recommend the book, Leading Equity, Becoming an Advocate for All Students. And this was adopted from so I used to have a PDF on basically 10 things that you can do to get started with being an advocate. So here's the thing. When I first started the show, it was all about, you need to, here's some challenges that are happening within our communities, within our schools, disproportionality, school to prison pipelines. Here's all these different things that are happening. And people were, okay, Sheldon, we get it. We understand that equity is a thing that we need to be focused on, but how? How can I tell my supervisor, my principal, that what you're saying is prejudice, or you're using coded language, or these stats are negatively? How do I approach these things?
And so a lot of my episodes towards the end, my later episodes, if you will, are more on the steps, how-to steps. And so putting all that together. So if you're like, I don't remember how much my book costs at this point, but if you're like, I don't have enough to put it in the cart. However, I recommend check out podcast episodes. I have plenty of them, but if you're really just trying to get started, I always recommend the book first.
I love it. I'm glad that you're naming that. I have definitely been a consumer of both the book and the podcast, and I can tell you with certainty that it would be a great first read for someone entering the profession. Dr. Eakins, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. I've really enjoyed our time together, and I know that our guests listening have absolutely, if not enjoyed and learned, they've done more than that in listening to today's episode.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, everybody, for tuning in.
Thanks for listening to the Learning Can't Wait podcast. If you liked what you heard, please rate, review, and share this episode. Be the first to know when we have a new episode by subscribing wherever you listen to podcasts. If you'd like to be a guest on the show or have a suggestion for an episode, email us at podcast@itutor.com.
Grow your teaching staff with just one click. iTutor partners with state licensed teachers from across the U.S. to help schools provide additional instruction to students. Whether you need them part-time or full-time, our educators are standing by to get you started right away. Head to itutor.com to learn more.